Proverbs 31, verses 25 through 31. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and bless her, her husband also, and he praises her, saying, "Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all." Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the product of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So hello everyone, and good evening. So my friend Deidre said she likes the new format. Hopefully you guys do not mind the blanket. I have my French doors open. It is a little nippy in here while I'm recording this. So, well, you like the new format so much. You're in my home, and this is just going to keep me a little snug as a bug. So I appreciate you guys allowing me to have a blankie on. I really kind of want to go like this and snuggle under the blanket, but I said, I don't know if that would be inappropriate. So I did not. But anyway, I won't, I should say. But it is a little nippy, but it warms up, so I don't want to shut the doors. I'll let the coolness of the air come in. So guess what tonight is? Tonight is the finale of the account of Esther, and I'm really excited to dive in to this account this evening.
Begin the countdown.
So just so everyone knows the account of what's happening or what has happened in Esther, Mordecai is now in the high seat of authority. The battle has started. It was turned up on its head. So far, we read last week that the Jews have killed 500 people in the citadel of Susa and then all these other places. The 10 sons of Haman. The first time we read is they didn't seize their plunder. I asked you to circle that because remember all the way from the chapter 3, we're reading about Haman wanting to seize the plunder. So not only was he doing it for the hatred of the Jews, he was doing it for monetary greed gain. Understand? So here we are tonight. Haman is now dead, and we are at the 13th day of the 12th month. That's where we're at. So let's pick it up where we kind of ended last week in chapter 9, verses 6 through 10. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And then remember 7, 8, 9. I'm not going to read those names. Just there we go. Then the 10 sons of Haman, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Again, circle that in verse 10. Now, I'm saying all of that about the seizing of the plunder because some might just skip over that. But I feel like when the Bible repeats something, it's kind of like the Galatians passage. Galatians chapter 1, verse 6 through 12, 13, whatever it is. Paul repeats himself back to back. If I or an angel should preach another gospel, they're accursed. If someone preaches another gospel, they are accursed. So when it's repeated like that, within a close time frame, I would say, is there a reason why? Well, here we're going to read that tonight. So in verse 10, in verse 15, and verse 16, they did not seize plunder was repeated. And I said, well, that must be important. Well, why is it important? Found out why. Haman was greedy. The Jews were not. See the difference? Okay, we'll get there though. So I think we should finish tonight only because there's 3 verses in chapter 10. So the bulk of what we're going to read tonight, of course, is 9. And then chapter 10 will close it out. So let's pick it up again in verse 10 through verse 16. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. On that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your further request? It shall also be done. The favor of the king still continues with Esther. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded that it should be done so. And an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month Adar and killed 300 men in Susa. Circle it, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and rid themselves of their enemies and kill 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not lay hands on their plunder. So I wanted to include verse 10 again to show you within that passage, it was mentioned 3 times, but they did not lay hands. But, get my point? Okay. It is setting apart the greed and the hatred of what Haman wanted versus the Jews. The Jews were not doing this for greed or monetary gain. They were protecting themselves. They were defending themselves. I would love to have known, which this passage never tells us how. I would love to have known how God intervened on that day. How did the Jews protect themselves? I guess one day we'll find out. Without God being mentioned in this account, we know, and we'll learn shortly, that God is still given praise for this amazing intervention, even without saying his name. Let us continue. Esther 9:17 through 22. This was done on the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Let's stop there. You can write in your Bible. Will make that verse clear. The day arrived, right? It was told to them, and in 2 days in Susa they killed their enemies. It's very important there. So you know what I was reflecting upon when I was reading this particular chapter is what's going to happen in Ezekiel chapter 38. I know it doesn't say one day, but what's going to happen in Israel when that invasion happens? Because clearly they don't turn to God. Hear me on that, right? They don't repent, because then there would be no tribulation. It would happen, and then, well, Jesus would come because they would call upon the name of Yeshua. But they do know that God intervenes. So that's the thing with Jewish people. They also believe in God. They believe in this religious God, but they have not put their faith in Jesus. It's a big difference in that. I hope you guys understand that. Verse 18, but the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. I put that in bold for a reason. So again, in Susa, it took the 13th and the 14th day to annihilate, to kill everyone. So they rested on the 15th day. However, which we're going to read here, it was not the same when we get to verse 19. Therefore, the Jews of the rural areas who lived in the rural towns make the 14th day of Adar a holiday for rejoicing and feasting and sending portions of food to one another. So again, in the rural areas, it took 1 day to annihilate their enemies. In Susa, it took 2 days to annihilate their enemies. So therefore, that's why it's 14th and the 15th. That's why we're going to read here that day of Purim is both on the 14th and the 15th day. Then Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obligating them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually. I highlighted that for a reason. So again, feel free to circle that in your Bible. And I'm going to circle back as to why. Because on those days, the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which was turned for them for sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday. That they, circle that as well, into a holiday. That's the key word, is holiday. They should make them days of feasting and rejoicing and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So what a beautiful account that we just read. So a couple of things here. In the Bible, we know that feasts are important. However, This is a holiday and not a feast. Notice the difference. That's why I wanted you to circle that. Also, God did not implement the holiday. It was done by Mordecai. So Mordecai is the one who obligated them to celebrate this day, of which to this current day, the Jews still celebrate Purim. And as we know, and we're going to get to it scripturally, Purim is from what? Pure, when they casted their lots. That's where they get that from. So the following that I'm going to read in Esther chapter 9 will kind of give a recap of what we've been studying for the past 8 weeks. Esther chapter 9, verses 23 through 32. Thus the Jews undertook what they had started to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to disturb them and destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme, which had been devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they call these days Purim, after the day pure, after the name pure. And because of the instructions in this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for their descendants and for all those who themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to their regulation and according to their appointed time annually. So again, verse 27 is very important that I just read, because this is not part of the Mosaic law. The day of Purim has nothing to do with the Mosaic law. It is a holiday. It is a remembrance of what Queen Esther did, turning their sorrow into joy. That's all it is. But because I say that, that does not mean we negate the fact that God intervened in this story, that God's faithfulness is still in this story. Clearly, I would feel, because of the passage, that God is okay with them celebrating Purim. God is allowing them to keep this holiday for remembrance. This is something important because it's in the Bible and something that they still celebrate today. Verse 28. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. And these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, or their memory fade from their descendants. The Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote the full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces, to the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely words of peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times. Just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants with instructions for their times of fasting and lamentations. The command of Esther established these customs for Purim, and it was written in the book. So again, what book is verse 32 referring to? Not the Bible. It's referring to what we read weeks ago about the royal archives. As I kind of made it into terminology of today, just think about journalists going around, not reporting fake news, but real news, and just writing, just jotting stuff down of what was taking place current day. So I'm sure there were a lot of different people taking notes of what was happening around the kingdom. So to finish out this wonderful account, I really hope, first of all, that I made Esther make a whole heck of a lot more sense. I know that it helped me. I loved journeying through this account. It was beautiful. What I loved most is the God who's always working behind the scenes when we don't see, hear, or maybe even know that he's there. God is always present. And all of us can understand a God who is faithful to the unfaithful. We can also understand a God who is always, always, always going to protect his chosen nation, Israel. He's never going to let his hand off of that nation in any way, shape, or form. So the final 3 verses of Esther, Esther chapter 10, verses 1, 2, and 3. Now King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the accomplishments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with many kingsmen, one who sought the good of his people, and one who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation. So this final part is the reason so many say that this account is not really true, because within the historical books, they cannot find this. So therefore, if this was actually in the book of records, how come it's not there, right? So just so you guys know that verses 1 and 2, the reason this is in here, because it speaks of the vastness and the might of King Ahasuerus' power. In verse 1, when it says, laying a tribute on the land, that means he's ensuring tranquility. Verses 2 and 3 are paying homage to Mordecai. I find it fascinating, though, nowhere else in the entire Bible do we read about Esther or Mordecai. Anywhere else. Their names are never mentioned in any other passage in the Bible. They're never noted as righteous people. And I've mentioned this before time and time again. They're not even in the hall of faith in Hebrews 11. So when I was reading this, I always reflect on other passages in the Bible. If you don't think that God would promote a Jew within a Gentile nation, you haven't read the Bible. So Daniel chapter 5, verse 29, who else was promoted? Then Belteshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. What kingdom was that? The Babylonian kingdom, where Daniel was brought into captivity from the nation of Israel, and God esteemed him, moved him to the third position. And you know what's funny? This isn't some word of faith junk. And so many teachers, these false teachers, right? They take these accounts of Esther being promoted or Daniel or all these other people, and they act like that's us. Well, it's not us, because it has nothing to do with us. It has every plan and purpose for who? Israel. I just wanted to say that. The account in Esther during their celebration of Purim, this account is read every single year. And I know I'm a broken record on this, but God is in control of everything that's happening. God is in control of all of our history, because he's already at the end of time. Satan is not all-knowing. He doesn't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes, 10 years. He has no clue. He might have an idea. He has no clue, just like we don't have a clue of what's going to happen. So stop trying to invent things and make things up and act like we're God and we know. I can't see into the future. I have no idea what's going to happen. But God and God alone is working sovereignly behind the scene, especially when it comes to the nation of Israel. And everything that we have read in this entire account of Esther, we see the free will of man being used for God's providential plans. We see it. We can't deny that. So here on the screen are some aha moments where we see God's providential hand working through the free will of man. First one, Queen Vashti, a Persian, was no longer queen, thus allowing Esther, a Jew, to arise for such a time as this. Mordecai, a man who may or may not have been righteous, God used his lack of bowing to Haman to stir the evil heart of Haman to plot against God's people. Mordecai was forgotten by man, but never by God. Haman, who was a rude and arrogant man, was put in a place of predominance, but that place should have been Mordecai, but Mordecai was brought low. God now exalted and honored Mordecai along with all the other Jews. The Jews were hated and a bounty was placed on their head. The Jews, with God's help, whatever that looked like, killed 75,000 plus of their enemies. The 75 were in the rural areas and the 500 were in Susa, so that 500 includes the 10 sons of Haman. And although it's not a Mosaic law, Purim is still celebrated today. Hence the reason I truly believe that even though historically this account is not seen with our eyes. I am telling you right now, there is some proof somewhere because the Jews are still celebrating this account today. The moral of the Esther account is that God and God alone is in control. God and God alone deserves worship. Why? Because in this account, we know that we serve a great, a faithful, a just, a merciful, a gracious, a loving, and a holy God. That is the account of Esther. So I'm going to put my hands under a little blankie here. My hands are cold. So until I see you guys, Lord willing, here, there, or in the air. Can I go like this? Bang, brr.